Good afternoon. We are so glad you are all here. We're going to start off with a brief video that gives you a flavor of what I've been busy doing on this tour.
In the past 5 years, the 3 university research corridor institutions, Michigan State University, the University of Michigan, and Wayne State University, conducted $1.64 billion in infrastructure-related research and programs in the fields of water, mobility, energy, and communications. To highlight challenge areas and build new connections, the URC launched the Infrastructure Innovation Tour across Michigan. 5 stops, 5 issues. With the help of researchers, legislators, and local government and business leaders, each stop explored regional needs, emerging research, and set the stage for future collaboration. In Monroe, algal blooms and microplastics threaten water quality, while new lead and copper rules challenge municipal water systems to find innovative, cost-effective solutions. Rural communities like Sanilac County struggle to access broadband internet. Creative partners may help bridge the digital gap there and elsewhere. Sterling Heights attendees shared new ways to repair and rebuild roads, from funding partnerships and new materials to sensor technology and monetizing roadway data.
What I liked about today was you're also adding the higher ed component and the research component into the conversation, which also I think has been really neglected over time.
PFAS contamination threatens Michigan's drinking water. In Kalamazoo, cleanup discussions focused on data partnerships, groundwater models, and filter technology to capture and destroy these contaminants.
There was a lot of brain power in here, and I think the more knowledge and the more collaboration of knowledge, the better we're all going to be and the better served our public will be.
In Sault Ste. Marie, we unpacked the economic and environmental impacts of maritime shipping and how balancing competing interests in our interconnected system can yield better solutions and greater opportunities.
I'm very appreciative of what URC has done for us here in the community and what they're trying to do. And getting us all together is an important aspect in that. And we will look forward to sharing information both locally, but getting information as well.
University partnerships have yielded infrastructure products like bendable concrete, sensors for roadways, bridges and locks, filters to remove PFAS, and accelerated ballast tests for ships in the Great Lakes. Community conversations help understand research needs, build new partnerships, and provide insight for decision-making today and tomorrow.
M. Roy Wilson became president of Wayne State University in August 23rd. You can come up here, it's okay.
Just shorten it.
Well, no, I'm not going to. Previous leadership positions include Deputy Director for Strategic Scientific Planning, Program Coordination at the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, the National Institute of Health, Dean of the School of Medicine at Creighton University, President of Texas Tech University Health Science Center, and Chancellor of University of Colorado, Denver Anschutz Medical Centers. As an ophthalmologist and epidemiologist, research focused on glaucoma and blindness populations from the Caribbean to West Africa. In 2003, President Wilson was elected to the National Academy of Medicine, one of the highest honors in the field of medicine. He received his undergraduate degree from Allegheny College, MS in epidemiology from UCLA, and an MD from Harvard Medical School.
Thank you, Brittany. Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to Wayne State University. We're really pleased that the final stop of the URC tours here at iBio, as I like to call it, science. This really is a very special facility, only because of its, but also because it's a facility where people really work like that integrated style. Try to find diseases that really people work collaborative team. So I think it's an ideal meeting to have URC have its takeaways at the beginning, and also the excuse me, an opportunity for Detroit and other communities across Michigan facing similar challenges benefit from the tour traveled 5 across Michigan to spark dialogue with local experts, decision makers about infrastructure needs. They learned firsthand what it's like communities face PFAS contamination, alga blooms, crumbling and unsafe roads, lack of broadband access, economic and environmental impacts of critical maritime trade. And they discussed how the URC's innovation and research talent can be applied to those needs for meaningful impact to their quality of life. The Wayne State and our URC partners, Michigan State University and the University of Michigan, play a key role in identifying infrastructure risks, understanding implications for human health and economic growth, and developing innovative solutions to complicated infrastructure challenges. Over the past 5 years, our university has conducted a combined $1.64 billion in infrastructure-related research. And we're making strides in developing smart technologies and innovative materials to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and safety of our shared infrastructure, responding to the drinking water crises across our state and preparing the next generation of talent infrastructure-related careers. Tackling our most urgent infrastructure challenges requires that we work together. And when it comes to infrastructure, URC researchers have a well-developed network across the corridor. Apologies, I ate some nuts on my way over here and it's getting caught in my throat. Here are just a few examples. The Michigan Sea Grant is a collaboration between University of Michigan and Michigan State that integrates Great Lakes research, outreach, and education for the protection and sustainable use of the Great Lakes and coastal resources. We're coordinating responses to the Flint water crisis through the Wayne State-led Flint Area Community Health and Environmental Partnership, which includes Michigan State, University of Michigan, Kettering University, Colorado State University, and the Henry Ford Health System. And we're working to extend broadband access for many low-income families and those living in rural areas of Wayne State and Michigan State's Puello Center through its Broadband to the Neighborhood project. Puello Center Director, Dr. Johannes Fire is here, and I believe we're going to hear from him later. Our 3 universities have been collaborating for a long time. For instance, in 1966, we formed the nonprofit Michigan Educational Research Information Triad, which now includes all of Michigan's public universities. Today, you'll hear from Joe Sawatsky, Barrett's president and CEO, who was here about 5 years ago, director of our IT services. We partner as well with fellow researchers from universities across the state, such as Michigan Tech, Western Michigan, and Lake Superior State, hosted one of our dialogues before. Also essential to this network are the relationships with partners in government, industry, and philanthropy, the organizations many of you represent. We all want to live in a state that competes with top talent. It makes this a desirable place to live, work, study, play. And I look forward to participating in today's event with you as we learn about the tour's findings and explore opportunities to move Michigan forward. You know, I have to say, Brittany, you don't know this, but I think this is a great idea came up with, actually borrowing it, because I see you went all the way up from the Upper Peninsula and then you worked your way down various communities throughout the state. I thought it's a great thing to do, and so later this summer, we're going to be doing this thing with our bicycling road tour. So we're going to start the upper parts of Michigan, go through 5 communities, hiking about 100 a day. doing exactly what you did here, get to know the communities and get to know the communities. Thank you very much for the idea. I wish you, thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you, President Wilson. And I really want to thank all of you for making time today to come. And so just in the event some of you are not as familiar with the URC, let me give you a little bit of background. We are an alliance of Michigan's 3 largest research universities. We're dedicated to working together to positively impact our state economy, communities, and residents. The URC is competitive with the nation's top university research clusters you probably have heard of, like Silicon Valley and North Carolina's Research Triangle. The URC is unique, though, among these other clusters, and that is because we comprise 3 distinct yet complementary research universities that are all public serving. With our annual R&D activity at $2.3 billion, the URC accounts for 92% of all academic R&D conducted in our state. We help drive Michigan into a top 10 national ranking for total academic R&D. In Michigan, URC contributes $18.7 billion in economic impact. And that impact, by the way, is felt in every single county. We know because we always check. Each year, we generate nearly 79,000 jobs and award more than 36,000 degrees. And half of our collective 1.2 million alumni live right here. They call Michigan home. We are the people's universities. We serve you. We do it through the research we conduct, talent we prepare, the discoveries we launch, the partnerships we forge, communities in which we engage. One role of the URC is to identify areas where we are or could play a role in helping tackle some of our greatest challenges, such as how to best fix and improve our infrastructure. In May 2018, we published a report examining how the 3 URC universities contribute to improving infrastructure from the perspective of innovation and talent development. We built on the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission by looking at mobility, energy, communications, and water. And this is what we learned. You heard it earlier from President Wilson. Over the past 5 years, our universities conducted $1.64 billion in infrastructure-related research and development, which sounds a lot, but what does that really mean? Reporting is one of the most important things we do at the URC. It is an important endeavor in measuring the collective value of our 3 highly intensive research institutions in areas of great importance to our state, to assess essentially our impact and hold ourselves accountable. But, so what? What do we do with this? A report should be just the beginning. What do we learn from the report, and what action do we take to broaden our impact, pursue opportunities that will strengthen Michigan and its. And so for quite a while, we have felt at the URC a pull to start to get out beyond where we have the greatest connections, places we may not feel connected, most a series of dialogues. So we launched last year the Infrastructure Innovation Tour. The purpose of this tour is three main reasons. 1, to bring more attention to critically important infrastructure-related challenges across the state. 2, promote the role that innovation, such as results from research conducted at our universities, has in addressing some of these challenges. And 3, to foster greater engagement by listening, connecting, and seeding opportunities for longer-term engagement in communities and universities. So, we based what issues we looked at, where we went on our research, as well as discussions with external stakeholders. We selected 5 top-level infrastructure issues and then identified 5 locations that were on the front lines of these issues. Word first about our partners. You know, like any good guest, we relied on the hospitality and the expertise of local partners who were critical in bringing in local experts. In some cases, local participants had connections to the URC, but in many cases, there were no pre-existing. And by design, each dialogue was a roundtable of experts from different viewpoints. So, our first stop. And by the way, there is a report that we put on your seat that has some more detail about each of these stops. It was conducted by Elizabeth Briggs, who is our moderator. Later time you can take a look at that. But just real quick for our purposes here, we went into Monroe, Michigan last October. Dr. Carol Miller, who's actually one of our panelists today, along with her colleague, Barry Leroy, Monroe Director of Water and Wastewater, framed the discussion with brief presentations. This was the format each of our dialogues had. They were an entire roundtable of experts. So we selected a couple, one from URC, one from the local, frame the conversation. And when it comes to Monroe, in addition to the algal blooms in western Lake Erie, we learned that the city's water infrastructure challenge is maintaining water quality that meets requirements. New mandates, such as state's lead and copper rule, are important, present a challenge for municipalities. So finding ways to help cities be more proactive, reactive. For Monroe, gaining access to expertise in chemistry, public health, water, environmental science, public policy could be invaluable. Greater coordination with URC researchers would yield greater impact for Monroe and places like it. This is particularly critical now as we face additional challenges related to emerging contaminants, costs, and predictions of what is shaping up to be a record-breaking year for algal blooms. So, our first takeaway is the need and the desire for greater coordination. That came through in this discussion, and I'll tell you through in every other discussion we had. Second stop, we went to Sanilac County. Now that I've lived in Michigan for a long time, I can tell you it's we were looking at broadband access. For most of us in this room, we are rarely disconnected from the internet. We often seek ways to go off the grid for a few hours or even a few days. But for many in our state, in rural and urban areas, they are unable to connect to the wider world every day. And for some communities, such as Detroit, the infrastructure is in place. There are economic barriers. In rural areas, such as Sanilac County, the infrastructure does not exist, and they have financial issues. There's no market incentives for private companies. Michigan Connect Executive Director Eric Frederick and MSU Chief Information Officer Rob McCurdy framed the conversation, and we learned that there are statewide efforts underway, which I think you're going to hear about later from Joe Sawaski, as well as Dr. Bauer. So some communities, though, they cannot wait. They have kids who can't do their homework. Farmers run their businesses. They're heavily dependent on wireless access. And people with good ideas can't start new businesses. Some communities are just not waiting. We learned that the Sanilac County ISD, several partners, have developed what they refer to as a tree draw. This is a contraption. I haven't seen it, but it's a contraption that they put around the tree with a hardware to help extend network in their community. The question then becomes, how can we provide greater support and passion so that communities like Sanilac don't need to literally bra strap their way? So, third stop, Sterling Heights. Yes, we talked about roads. We all have stories about roads. But even among these, Mound Road stands out. Innovate Mound Road is a local collaborative effort to rebuild that road, which is a critical roadway for the many defense companies and other manufacturers in the area. We wanted to learn more about the project and how the URC universities could be of value. Luke Bonner of Bonner Advisory Group and Dr. Jerome Lynch, Chair of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Michigan, framed the conversation, which became a robust discussion about potential innovations that could be used to rebuild our road. We learned about the vital role the Michigan Department of Transportation plays in moving innovations from our labs to the market. MDOT tests university innovations, such as sensors on the Mighty Mac and bendable concrete on bridges in Washtenaw County. For effectiveness, letting communities know what works. Recognize how important it is for us to recognize MDOT's role. We also learned just how important it is. In an effort to better understand the Mound Road project, Luke Bonner had shared several times with the critical role industry played in getting the project funded, which I understood as part of the narrative. But during the dialogue, sitting at the table with industry members involved, I was struck by the value they provided and the need they had. And if this was true in Hyde, where else is it? So that leads to another takeaway. Engagement is meaningful. There are few substitutes for being present. The fourth stop, this one was a challenge. It's a challenge because it's emerging. Water infrastructure and contamination issues, including PFAS, or the set of forever and seemingly everywhere chemicals that are popping up in waterways across our state and the nation, represent this crisis. We had Parchment Mayor Robert Briggs and Dr. David Heineman, Michigan State University's Department Chair of Geological Science, conversation. You know, there's a lot of anxiety in the community. Many concerned citizens wanted to attend the dialogue. You know, their anxiety is legitimate. And it's driven by the fact there is more unknown than known about PFAS effects on health and the environment. There are many avenues of inquiry that need to be pursued, from identification of contaminants, development of remediation methods, and research into the impacts on health. We learned that as they are fielding questions from anxious, our elected officials are a valuable source for providing direction to our university researchers and others in terms of where those research priorities should start. And sometimes we also learned that the elected officials themselves are anxious residents. Both Parchment Mayor Briggs and Cooper Township Supervisor Jeff Sorensen shared that they and their families, like their constituents, have been drinking the contaminated water. Their input is critical in figuring out what we should. So that's another takeaway. In an emerging crisis, it is critically important to incorporate the questions our elected officials are being asked. One other lesson I want to say about taking PFAS, because it is an emerging, we have a lot of researchers that are not necessarily known for PFAS, and a lot of researchers moving into that space help figure out some solutions. And so it becomes a challenge at our universities to really identify everyone who's wading into wanting to. So it's a note to ourselves that communications up with our university, who's doing that work. So we recognize. And then our final stop, we went all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie, and for the first time ever, I actually went to the box with our staff. Dennis, it was, I don't know what took me so long. We were there because we really wanted to understand and discuss the balancing that happens, being concerned about environmental issues, economic issues. Everybody understands maritime trade is blocked. We had Lake Superior State University's Dr. Kevin Pinsky did practice that, tutored me. He's the Assistant Director of Research for the Center for Freshwater Research. And then we also had Dr. Jen Reed, who is Water Center Director at the Graham Sustainability Institute at the University of Michigan. They framed the conversation. Dr. Reed noted that the various interests in the Soo Locks, critical piece of infrastructure for the entire Great Lakes region and the nation, represent interlocking systems that require research expertise, a lot of negotiation. We all want to figure out how best to do it. We're all part of that. One clear point of discussion is that the building of the new lock represents an opportunity to deploy new technologies into its design, such as the ones developed and tested by URC institutions. Those include sensor technologies, which could go a long way in enabling the long-term health and functioning of the lock. We recognize that the URC could and likely should position itself as a resource for the Army Corps of Engineers in the design of the new lock. Outside of these technological, environmental, and trade-related aspects of the Soo Locks, much of the discussion acknowledged the region's need to plan for the building of the new lock, which is expected to double the population of Sault Ste. Marie and increase those living in its Canadian system over the next decade. But it's not permanent, right? Temporary. It's a boon to the region, but it also could cause some serious problems. This is an incredible opportunity, but housing and jobs need to be planned for. The region is already experiencing a severe affordable housing shortage, and inequalities exist that skills and employment opportunities. Questions are, how could the community best work with the Army Corps of Engineers, which reportedly has been a great partner thus far, use the project to improve the community? So our takeaway is that beyond innovations, critical to consider the economic impacts for residents. So these are the 5 takeaways I discussed. We're still trying to make sense of them, frankly. That's why you guys are here. These infrastructure issues are complicated, and they require innovative solutions that draw from multiple perspectives and expertise. And while syncing available research and innovation to solving some of our more vexing problems remains a challenge, these dialogues were eye-opening. They were honest, clear, and finding ways to work through this timing. We have residents who need solutions yesterday. Science. Longer. So the discussions, though, encourage longer-term thinking, endorsed a shared interest in greater and coordination. And here we are in Detroit. We think that these 5 location-specific discussions have implications for other communities in Michigan, which faces similar challenges within those 5 infrastructure issues we've. Today, we have asked you all to come to help us discuss the implications for Detroit and other cities. So with that, I want to introduce Elizabeth Briggs, who is our moderator today. Again, she is the author of the report that is on your seat. Developed that report by reviewing all the content we captured from our 5 dialogues, including audio, video, notes, and summaries. So it took a while. And then she provided an overview of what we heard, what we learned, and where we might go from here. So you can read more about her in the bio sheet. She is the Managing Director of Freshwater Coast Solutions. And if I can have the panelists also join her at the table.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. It's my pleasure to be with all of you. And really for the next 30 to 35 minutes, we'll be engaging in a conversation. I'll be here as a moderator, but certainly we hope that this will engender just conversation among all of you. So let's start with real brief introductions. Peter Adrians is with us today. He's a professor at the University of Michigan on environmental engineering, finance, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Next to you is Carrie Dugan, partner at Ridge Lane Limited and Ridge Lane Capital, the sustainability practice, and founder and principal at Sustainability LLC. Clever. Okay. And then next to Carrie is Carol Miller, who's a professor at Wayne State University, civil and environmental engineering, and director of Healthy Urban Waters. Hello, Leo C. Kempel is Dean of the Michigan State University College of Engineering. And moving over to this side, we have Dennis Segru, a professional engineer and also lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army and a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. Joseph, or Joe Sawaski, who is president and CEO at Merit Network, Inc. Welcome. Kirk Steidel, Senior Vice President at Econolight Systems, and Eric Pardini, Senior Consultant at Public Sector Consultants. So welcome, all of you. As you may have heard earlier, when we are speaking, we have some microphones around the table, and you may just want to bring that closer. Take it off. Good. Well, I think to start, I'm very interested to get initial reactions from each of you. Just wondering what your initial thoughts, reactions are from the takeaways that Brittany just shared with us. So are there general trends or themes that you're thinking of?
In principle, there's a lot of infrastructure challenges across the state, and we know that the longer you take to work on them, the higher the cost is. But on the flip side, there's a lot of technology coming out. And so it'll be very important to blend the adoption of new technologies to kind of bootstrap going forward to fixing our infrastructure with the importance, of course, of doing it in a thoughtful way.
Sure. In terms of some overriding themes, I thought collaboration was a theme that came out certainly at the tour stops that I attended, and it sounds like the others that Britt related here today. So collaboration, by that I mean certainly among our universities, which I think we're well on the way to having that, but also collaboration with the governmental agencies as well as the private sector, having those groups involved at the table. I know that for water infrastructure in Michigan, there have been a lot of advances due to the fact that our universities are working with the water utilities, whether that be GLWA here in the Detroit area, or I know the University of Michigan is working very closely with the Ann Arbor Water Utility and so on. So I think those sorts of collaborations, getting our expertise actually out in the field, internships can help a lot with that also. So just a broader theme of collaboration, I think, is very important.
Echoing that, whoa, I'm loud. Echoing what I heard here, because I think sometimes the points that Britt was making about collaboration and engagement are throwaways. And my previous experience tells me that they're in fact not throwaways. I spent a good deal of time embedded in City Hall here in Detroit on behalf of President Obama and former President Biden, Vice President Biden. And that taught me a lot about listening, which Britt mentioned, providing capacity, literally being the capacity at a time when the city was really struggling to have the capacity needed to leapfrog its infrastructure, and then providing technical support and additional financial resources. And that was the biggest lesson I learned from that, and I think it's directly transferable to no matter if we're talking about energy, water, transportation, or the built environment. So I would just echo what you just said about engagement and collaboration, which is indeed a contact sport.
I'll take this, Mike. I think there is something missing from the takeaways. And I direct a Center on Infrastructure Finance at the University of Michigan, actually in the College of Engineering. And very often in the conversations, wherever you were in the state, I wonder how many public finance managers, partners in public-private partnerships, and others were available, because one of the biggest problems is the infrastructure finance gap, right? There's a lot of needs, there's not enough money. I mean, that's the bottom line. Most of the infrastructure that we have in the state, the legacy infrastructure, is financed using a financial instrument that is essentially over 200 years old. And that has been modified a little bit. I'm talking municipal bonds and a little bit of loans mixed into that, and that's where you get your infrastructure. As you think about infrastructure innovation, we have to think about financial innovation too. And in fact, when you sort of go around the country and play around the financial system a little bit, there is a lot of conversation now around Industry 4.0 meets infrastructure. So basically, how do we start integrating smart infrastructure systems, the data plays in unlocking new kinds of money that here too were not involved in infrastructure finance. And this is efficient capital. This is where the insurance companies come in. This is where new debt securities come in. I don't want to throw all the terminology out there, but there is a lot of money that has never played in infrastructure. Pension funds nationwide, only 1% of pension funds are committing any dollars to infrastructure. And a lot of that is because of the way we design infrastructure. So infrastructure design and infrastructure financing are actually directly linked. So you sort of get what you can finance, or you finance what you can get. So we have to, so the two of them are actually working in tandem. And I think that's a big part of the conversation. Maybe even a question, maybe too early here, but whether that even, just to plant the seed then, whether that even came up at any of these stops in your tour, where the financing model sort of, where financial issues came in.
It actually came up with your colleague, Jerry Lynch, at the Sterling Heights Yes, he had a perfect slide dedicated to you. So.
So, as I listened to the presentation and the takeaways, the one thing that struck me, if you look at all of those in total, is there's a bunch of people working on one little piece of the solution, and they think that they've got their figured out, whether it's a project solution, financial solution. Big takeaway is they've all got to be balanced, whether it was the engagement of the community, whether it was to look at the economics of what you're doing. You have to look at it in totality and pull all of those pieces together, because you could have the best technological solution that nobody can pay for, and it's not ever going to get implemented. So it's got to all be looked at together. And the financing and funding, and those are two different issues. You know, you can find all kinds of ways to creatively finance. You don't have enough money to pay for it at the beginning. It doesn't. All of that stuff has to be viewed together in the same lens and the same conversation, because everybody wants something free, and it's not going to happen.
Really quickly, one of the things I found is a theme in these talks is that you can't do it alone, right? So building on Carol's point about collaboration, this is a motivated group of. They want to invest in their. They don't look at these things as expenses. Look at them as investments in sustainability and viability of their communities, and boy, they're motivated, and they've got a lot of skin in the game.
One of the things that I take away here, the need for infrastructure is pretty well known and documented. We talk about it all the time. It's in the media everywhere. I think solutions, Dean Kemple mentioned, technology's there, solutions are there. It's decision and action that's kind of slower. And I think to Peter's point, the understanding of the value that infrastructure gives and being able to balance cost and value, not just for the community, but for the greater stakeholders, those financial arms that we describe. There's a knowledge gap there, being able to connect those two that might present an opportunity.
Yeah, I also had an observation to add, and building off of this collaboration, I think the way that this has been brought out into communities, it shows that this is really an opportunity to take advantage of those first movers and to get to a point of scalability through communication of success stories. And so how are we leveraging the partnerships that are built through tours like this to say, hey, I've got something that works in my community, because each community is dealing with their own infrastructure problems across the state. And the water example from Western Michigan, I think, has a lot of implications, as we're only discovering the early instances around PFAS contamination. And so we're just sort of on the leading edge there.
Thank you, everybody. This will probably be very frustrating because we'll just want to dig into all of these with more time than we have. But since we are in Detroit, and Brittany set it up very nicely about the fact that this multi-stop tour is now here, and thinking about, in this context, these topics, these areas of infrastructure, what are the implications for this city, this community, and the challenges that exist? And Carrie, I'd like to draw on your experiences of working in the city on these issues. What are your thoughts on priorities, opportunities that exist in terms of addressing infrastructure gaps in Detroit?
Great. Well, I guess I already said what I used to do, so that's not a secret. I spent a lot of time, I came from the U.S. Department of Energy to Detroit on behalf of Secretary Moniz and then the former president, former vice president, at the request of the city and through a program that we're running to take a look at infrastructure wide. So I worked on the LED streetlight conversion, the urban solar park at O'Shea Park, and I was just getting into mobility when we all got, we finished our job. So looking at Detroit today, for me, the frame I have is about, honestly, site selection and competitiveness for this city and this region. So I don't take any of the individual infrastructure problems alone. They're all connected: energy, water, transportation systems, accessibility. They're all interrelated, and the built environment. We have a lot of challenges. Finance is certainly one of them. There are regulatory and policy roadblocks to residential upgrades, for example, that we need to overcome. But for me, I look at it from a lens of, climate impacts. This country faces billion-dollar disasters every year. That's not going to stop. So how does Detroit position itself, indeed leapfrog into the state of the art, using the great minds that we have in this room and at our universities? The strength of the URC is something that should not be taken lightly, but it's not sufficient. We need to bring in other regional partners, our national laboratories, for example. And then, frankly, this is an opportunity to create a virtuous cycle. I talk about competitiveness. You want your alumni to come back and live and work and play in these communities. I did that. I chose to come back, but not everyone does. So I would just ask that this brain trust continue to grow, that this table that Brittany and the team has put together be steadfast and continue, because that's frankly how we did the work. When I was in service, we created a table, brought every relevant agency to the table over 6.5 years. I'm very proud of the work we did, but it's persistent, painful, and you have to bring new partners to the table. Sorry, I will give the mic back now.
Thank you. I like that virtuous cycle. Possibly another perspective to add to this would be you, Joe. So Detroit has barriers to access in ways that might be different than other parts of Michigan. So can you tell us a little bit more about, or tell us about the Michigan Moonshot Project that Merit Network has been working on with other partners? I understand that it was unveiled at the Mackinac Policy Conference recently. So yeah, if you could tell us about the Moonshot Project and how it could help address some of the barriers in this city.
Sure. Well, I'd like to say it's great to be back at Wayne State, my old campus. Worked here for the better part of a decade and still love the place. I have a lot of friends here too, so thanks for the kind invitation. Yeah, we were really lucky to host a panel at the Mackinac Policy Conference. It was all about broadband, whether it was rural or urban, and the digital divide that exists both in those areas, urban and rural. And we were very honored to have Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist as a panelist on the panel. He didn't seem to mind that the name of our panel was Fix the Damn Internet for Students. He let us have that one, which was very kind to him, so that was pretty cool. We also had the CEO of Rocket Fiber, co-founder as well, Mark Hudson, was on the panel, and my friend and colleague, Dr. Johannes Bauer, who's in the audience, and I hope we have a chance to hear him speak in a moment too about this collaboration we have going. So it was a great panel. It was widely viewed, a lot of social media activity. And for those of you who don't know Merit, Merit is one of the artifacts of research collaboration between the URC schools, maybe one of the oldest ones, and most prevalent as well. So we are the nonprofit telecommunications organization that runs a 4,000-mile fiber optic network connecting all the public universities, supporting researchers and students and staff in their endeavors. And it's a very constructive collaboration, so that theme of collaboration kind of comes back in here. Because of the position I hold and because of Merit's expansive network, we were privileged to participate in Governor Snyder's broadband task force. And my eyes were really opened through that work about the challenges that are seen both in urban and rural areas. That report actually unveiled that 27% of students in Michigan do not have access to what the FCC classifies as the most rudimentary broadband internet access. And it's a tragedy. So Merit has steeled itself to actually launch this program called the Michigan Moonshot, which I describe as a comprehensive solutions framework that will help communities and citizens understand the extent of their problems, to really importantly measure broadband access in the state. And this is an issue that is, if you're in this area, you hear a lot about it. In fact, our own Senator Gary Peters last week is supporting legislation called the Broadband Data Act that is all about mapping broadband data better. And the reason I mention this is because there is money for broadband. The feds release tens of billions of dollars to support broadband infrastructure build-outs, yet they don't know where to go because the data mapping process they have is so fatally flawed. This is a huge national conversation. So this is an area where there is money, they just don't know where and how to spend it best. So it's really interesting. You asked me about the differences in rural and urban areas, and I'd like Dr. Bauer, when he gets a moment, to talk about the study they did called Broadband to the Neighborhood, the Digital Divide in Detroit. And the difference in Detroit is that it's really about affordability. So affordability is driving citizens to make choices between ISP services that are very robust to their homes or using their phone as a mobile network device. And that's why the problem exists in Detroit. It's really about affordability. In the rural areas, it's really about infrastructure. It's expensive, it takes a long time to build, wired or wireless, and there's a lack of it. So, but both those situations evidence themselves the same way. I have traveled all around the state, and I have seen families outside of libraries on cold, snowy nights in Michigan in their cars using free Wi-Fi at 7 o'clock so they can complete their homework. This is something that should not stand. And in Detroit, families are, bringing their students to McDonald's to complete their homework. And this is holding people back from their full potential. So that's why we've launched the program.
Great. Brittany?
So, Joe, can you just for everyone, and we can post it up on our website, can you tell where people can learn more about the Moonshot?
Sure. If you go to merit.edu, yes, we are a .edu. We actually managed, I think, that domain for a while nationally because we were so early on in the technology ecosystem nationally. If you go to our website and search for Moonshot, or I think you can go to merit.edu/Moonshot, and there's a lot of information about it. And I will say Merit is launching Michigan's first broadband summit in September, where we're trying to get communities and stakeholders and providers together to collaborate and share information. So I'll do a little plug there as well.
Joe, you mentioned the government funding, I think, that's for broadband. How are they making decisions right now on where to direct those funds, and what data sources are they relying on?
That's a great question, and that is actually the crux of the issue. So a couple times a year, all telecommunication providers fill out this thing called the 477 form, the FCC 477 form. If you live in my world, you know all about this. And telcos self-report whether they serve residents in these areas, and these are large areas, tens of square miles sometimes. And if they serve one resident or plan to serve one resident, they check a box, and no federal funding can come into these areas. Well, you full well know that if your neighbor on one street, half a county over, has broadband, you may not have it because providers may not have built there. Yet this is the process that is driving our funding, and I'm so thankful Senator Peters is really pushing for better ways to map. If I can leave you with one thing, mapping equals money in the broadband world. So,
Peter, do you want to give us one more thought about this? And
Yeah, just one more thought about this. I don't know whether you're aware of what San Francisco has done the last year and a half, essentially taking back broadband from market players and bringing it into the public realm by bond financing it such that there is more broader access to and that's in San Francisco, more broad access to broadband, even in the communities outside of the city.
that's great. And just one thing, I don't want to go too deep on broadband because we have a lot of really important issues to discuss. Dr. Bauer at MSU has launched a very novel citizen science crowdsource-based broadband data measurement experiment. He launched it this year, just in the last couple months, with 7,000 students in Michigan in rural areas. And in this way, we're trying to map from the citizen's perspective, not from the provider perspective. And I really want him to talk about this later when he gets a chance.
Yeah, great. We are planning to hear from Dr. Bauer after our panel.
Great.
Thank you. Great. So just moving on to one of our other infrastructure topics. So smart infrastructure came up frequently, maybe at all of the tour stops. And it was featured certainly in the URC's publication that kicked off the tour as well. Last spring's report. So, for example, at Stanislaus County and at the Sterling Heights tour stops, there was conversation about technologies, sensors, bendable concrete, other kinds of advancements in the field that are being tested, that are being used in the state. And so it'd be helpful to, I think, for us and for everyone here to get a bit of an overview or a rundown of what kind of sensor applications are being used. So I'm going to turn to you, Leo. Would you kind of give us a rundown of some of those sensor applications that are being used for water infrastructure and transportation, at least to start with?
And how much time do I have? A minute. Okay. So first, let's talk water. It's a fluid, of course, and you want to measure it as volumetrically as possible. So now there are sensors that can be deployed on robotic fish. So rather than getting point solutions every so far apart, you can continuously monitor the water and look for the molecules that don't die and so forth. In terms of bridges, we have sensors that we can embed in the bridges and in roads that do not require power. They'll be there 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and they tell you a lot about stress and strain going on. And from that, you can infer the health state of infrastructure. I think one of the most exciting type of sensors being deployed today in Michigan is really coming from the vehicles themselves. You know, the technology that the Detroit 3 have been putting into cars to enable mobility, to enable a more comfortable ride and so forth, also are sensors. They weren't necessarily built that way, but they can be built that way when you've got the connectivity. So I'm driving my car, the semi-active suspension system, I'm too cheap to buy that good of a car, but as I'm driving around in it, that same device that makes the ride smoother is a sensor. It will tell you the road state. And now if we offload that data from the vehicle via a comlink to MDOT, now we can start putting a map together of what the current state of our roads are and just be a lot more proactive. And perhaps even in finance, you can start working new models of how to keep our infrastructure going, because you've essentially have people deploying the sensors. Each one of us carries a sensor with us. I've even seen people with 4. If you have 4 cell phones on you, you've got 4 sensors, right? And we can use that data to improve our infrastructure. And it's incredibly inexpensive way for the state to do it, because the consumer is bearing most of the cost of bringing that sensor around. And so this is really an exciting time. The Internet of Things makes it ubiquitous sensing possible.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another concept that I would love to see added to the diagram that we had up there of the different infrastructure circles that were intersecting and so on, the Venn diagram there. I'm not sure whether it would be overlaid or another circle, but the whole health and you know, infrastructure, we're talking about infrastructure health as well as many other aspects of infrastructure, but then human health and environmental health and so on. So the sensors that we talk about, you know, certainly there are many sensors out to help us with asset management, with infrastructure, and to determine the health of the infrastructure and so on. But obviously there's tons going on regarding wearable sensors for human health. And the relationship between our infrastructure and the health of citizens in different places and so on, I think that's a very important connection that is obvious, but we all need to make, and I think it's also a connection that can help with some of the finance issues. Because in terms of going after financing, one thing that I found is that a lot of times people aren't too interested to hear about gray or green infrastructure, but when you start telling them about the impacts of poor infrastructure and the health impacts, that's when you start to get some real buy-in and some real understanding. So just one point that I wanted to make regarding the health and keeping that in there.
I'm just going to weigh in that I am excited about green and gray infrastructure. So, just quickly going back to my earlier point on not just isolating a singular type of infrastructure, as it relates to sensors, thinking about things like the LED street lights in Detroit, the sensors that could or may be attached to those to study things like air quality in some of our hardest impacted communities, as well as supporting an autonomous future. These may require new partnerships, like I was saying before. So I'm not ignoring, I'm not going to get technical, that's your job. But I do think that bringing more folks to the table to support these sort of P3 opportunities is important.
Yeah, I wanted to amplify what Carol said before, I guess, on the financial value. I mean, you think about it, sort of sensors, whatever sensors they are, whether they're in roads, in water systems, in energy systems, in water systems or whatnot, they make the difference between a cost of infrastructure and value of infrastructure. And Dennis brought that up earlier too. So the whole value of infrastructure is really the informational efficiencies, I guess, that get unlocked from infrastructure by sensors. And that piece of the whole digital asset, the digitalization of infrastructure, is really where the attractiveness is, I guess, for new folks, I mean, be they P3s or others, to sort of come into infrastructure, because that makes it different from what infrastructure was 20 and or even 10 years ago.
Thanks. So during the tour stops, we learned that MDOT, the Department of Transportation, has really been playing a crucial role in helping to develop some of these technologies and testing them out in the field. And Kirk, you had a previous role leading that agency for many years and helping to move the agency toward that technology-focused approach. Could you talk a bit about that role that MDOT has played and is playing in testing and developing these kind of technologies?
Sure. So first of all, you can appreciate the fact that any public agency has huge pressures to just fix today. Right now, it's just fix today. And I maintain for a long time, still do, will do forever, that if you just rebuild 1970, then you're stuck in 1970, right? And we're not doing any favors to our kids or grandkids if we rebuild 1970. So while we are rebuilding, we have to be looking forward. And part of looking forward is feeding the research so that we know where is the innovation, right? And then innovation comes out, you get lots of ideas. My test always was, is there a need for what somebody came up with? And I'll give you an example of one that clearly doesn't. It's not one. This was one developed in the private sector. In fact, I'll just tell you now. It was a big OEM that developed technology so that the car could lift up a tire as it drove over a pothole. I saw that and said, why don't we just pay to fill the pothole instead of put a $20,000 computer system on a car and have it jump around the road? So is there a need, right? Number two is it scalable? Right, because I have seen lots and lots of ideas, but they're not scalable, right? They're way too expensive and they can't be commercialized. And the third one is it commercialized? Because you can't just do one-offs and expect to do it over 100,000 miles of roadways, which is what we have in the state of Michigan, or 10,000 bridges. Just not going to work. So that's just the fundamentals of rebuilding. So we pushed really hard to make sure that we put money in to research, whether it's materials researchers or process research, or the latest in the last 10 years was this technology around mobility, connected automated vehicles, really working with the big auto companies that are here, suppliers, the rest, and say, what is it you need? What do you need infrastructure to do? And we ran parallel for a long time with autonomous and connected, and they go back and forth. But at the end of the day, it really is about tying systems together. Now, my new job, that's why I actually went to a technology company that's in infrastructure, and it revolves around traffic signals, because there is a lot of technology at every single intersection. There are a lot more sensors than most people even have a notion of. And if you look at it from the energy perspective, it's about how do you keep that flow moving? So you eliminate the congestion, you eliminate the bottlenecks, and you keep traffic moving wherever it's intended to go without stopping. So you increase that fuel efficiency. And frankly, at the end of the day, it's about safety and it's about saving lives, right? So all of the pieces we've talked about, if you come back to the community, it's about safety. It's about safety for all those different pieces. You know, on a roadway perspective, last year in the U.S., we killed 37,360 people. Well, in what realm is that ever acceptable? It's not. I mean, so there's got to be a component in there of safety as well. So from a public agency perspective, I advocate that you have to be looking forward. You have to dedicate, 0.5%, 1% of your budget into some kind of research that says, how are we doing it better?
Thank you. So moving more into the watery realm, at the Sioux Locks tour stop, we learned about some of the technologies, the innovations that are happening there to help keep the maritime trade and the navigation in the Sioux Locks working. So Dennis, I'm wondering, given your experience there, if you could help us with better understanding, what is the perspective from navigation, from maritime trade, for using these technologies, and what are some things that we should be thinking about?
So I'll give a couple different perspectives on that. From the Corps' perspective, we had a challenge maybe 5-10 years ago where we discovered some of the steel and the anchorages. These are the things that hold up the gates to the lock. and it had some structural issues to it. That's addressed now, but at the time it was assessed that there was a 7% chance of failure, on any given year. That is not within the margin of operation for us. What strikes me, though, is we didn't know about it for a number of years. Right? We had a pre-existing condition that I think some of the sensors we've already described and doing it smarter as we go to build new infrastructure up there, can we apply some of the new technologies that we have so we're not surprised by it again in 30 years? Let's do it smarter. From another perspective, I have heard from ship captains and the shipping industry the challenges of coming into the locks. It may not be obvious, and I don't know if anyone's been up there and seen a ship go off course and strike a wall or strike another ship. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens periodically. And the reason is there are some really tricky currents and hydraulics flowing through there. Can we employ some sensors that provide real-time feedback to the captains that allow them to make that adjustment approaching the lock? I think that technology exists. It sounds very reasonable. Closer to home, closer here in Detroit, we have ice dam conditions that pop up periodically, especially along Lake St. Clair, where we get the ice floating down, creating a dam, and flooding coastal communities. And we have come up with techniques to sense the difference in the lake levels in Lake Huron and then downstream in Lake St. Clair. And where we see a disparity, you see an anomaly, you're able to get the Coast Guard out there to clear it out. It reduces it a little bit. But I think, again, there's probably an opportunity in areas like that to do better, do more real time. Last year was one of particular challenge. So those are three that jump to mind. Another, and I'm unsure what the problem that needs solving here is, but those ships have sensors on them right now. So access to the data, again, that we've described already. How are we using the information that's already out there to make smarter decisions? Maybe we're making fewer delays at the port. Maybe we're making a more refined schedule of ships coming through the locks or through the other connecting channels, the Detroit River and such.
Moving along, I think I'm going to turn this back over to, or move back into our conversation that we started about finances and trying to come up with creative funding solutions. As was stated earlier, none of this is free. It's all going to cost something. So whether it's constructing the infrastructure or maintaining it, but of course we know that our local communities in Michigan also are very cash strapped. And how are they going to pay the costs for maintenance of infrastructure they have, let alone trying to upgrade or expand? So clearly we need some more creative financing options. So maybe Peter, kind of turn this back over to you if you want to continue thinking or sharing with us some, and others as well, about smart infrastructure financing, clean tech development. These are things that you've been working on for several years. So would you kind of pick this conversation up again about how we can creatively finance some of these infrastructure needs in the state?
Actually, let me start out with a question that's also for the entire audience. Anybody know what the first major piece of infrastructure built in the United States with crowdfunding is? First crowdfunded major piece of infrastructure. All of you know it.
North Pennsylvania water system. 1990 or 1790.
Okay, I'm going to ignore that one, the 79. Another one, everybody knows this one, and probably most of you have driven across it, the Golden Gate Bridge. So the Golden Gate Bridge in California was actually financed by citizens in a crowdfunding model in 1930. Since then, of course, operations and maintenance require new types of financing models and P3s, and now you pay your fees to get across the bridge and all of that. But we can never say, to your point earlier, that when you have impassioned and empowered citizens, they can build a nice piece of infrastructure. It's possible. So coming to the 2000s and this day and age, When I talk to communities, one of the things I say, you guys got to learn how to play the Moneyball game. Anybody here seen Moneyball? If you haven't, see Moneyball. Oakland A's, right? So the whole idea behind that is, and it makes it, it's very salient to the conversation on smart infrastructure and how you finance this. So how do you build a world-class baseball team on a fraction of the dollars that you got available? They essentially were a poor baseball team, right? They had no capital, they couldn't afford the $300 million players, right? They had 15 million. And what are you going to get for 15 million? Well, they looked at all the data of all the different players. How did they throw? How efficiently how they threw, their underhand to throw, overhand, I mean, all sorts of things, right? So look at the data and basically said, I think, you know, even though he's an odd duck, I mean, on a game, he actually completes, you know, and actually allows us to have home runs and whatnot. We're going to buy, he's undervalued by the market, but we're going to pay him 15 million and we got a world-class team. Of course, it only lasted for 2 years. We want our infrastructure to last for longer than 2 years, right? So now go to DC Water, right? So DC Water, a public water authority, I mean, it's the first experiment with a new financing model, right? A variable interest rate bond, or call it an impact bond. I mean, there's all sorts of language around that, right? Which is essentially a new, the first model by a public agency to actually incorporate operational data and inform the financials. So here was the choice. Either we're going to put a $2 billion pipe in the ground to convey our water and our overflows, or we're going to build green infrastructure above ground for 350 million. 2 billion, 350 million. To a community, to an agency, big difference, right? So, of course, the green infrastructure or smart infrastructure is a new thing, and anything that is a new thing carries risk, right? So, in order to finance 350 million instead of a pipe, which we've been financing for hundreds of years, right? So they needed to actually then provide the investors with an incentive. So here was the incentive. The argument was, DC Water said, if you're going to build a 350 million green infrastructure above ground that can divert all the water and actually move water away from our old gray infrastructure below ground, it reduces our O&M costs, and we're going to actually share out of these operations and maintenance costs to the investor that if this infrastructure performs better than expected, instead of a AAA 3.45% yield, you actually get 6 1/3 yield. So it was a win-win for the agency, for the community, because they had to take on less debt, and for the investor. So this whole Moneyball game is really about all the communities that we have, including the poor communities. They sit on data. They don't have, it's not about glitzy sensors, it's not about, having Google-type buildings and whatnot. That's not it. I mean, you got reports, right? You got operational performance, you got information on pipe breaks, you got information on how well the community likes the service that's being provided by the agencies. That is all data. And that data actually helps, of course, now we need to start thinking about new job creation, right? Because effectively all the infrastructure, smart infrastructure, is a tech play. It is no longer the way people used to maintain and manage and operate infrastructure. You need to become more tech savvy. So there needs to be, data scientists at the county level or at the state level to start looking at that kind of data. And here's the reason why we need to start doing it. I'm going to get to your poor communities too. One of the reasons we need to start doing it. So I'm working with Nuveen. Nuveen is an investment arm of TIAA, right? Which we know as educators, most of us know that quite well. So Nuveen is the third largest holder of municipal bonds in the United States, third largest. They're starting on an initiative to reprice and revalue all muni bonds in the entire United States by integrating operational data and just other intangible information data on every piece of infrastructure that was ever financed in the US. So basically, so now here's the value to communities, right? So if you even have some information, it doesn't have to be the glitziest sensor that Leo can come up with, right? It could be whatever information, whatever information, I guess, that is available in a piece of infrastructure. If you integrate that in, our water system, our energy system, our road system does this, that piece of information is now starting to get used by investors. They reprice and revalue, so you get preferential rating on a bond or on debt. preferential rating on bond or debt means reduced interest rate, means lower cost of capital to the community, right? So it's a whole trickle-down effect from information to cost of capital. And which public finance manager does not want to have low cost of capital on infrastructure? I mean, find me any of them. So now regarding the poorer communities, we have a lot of conversation around that, because once you have a smart infrastructure system, the whole, I would say, financial model kind of changes. I mean, think about a bond, a traditional bond. You issue a bond, say, on a road, on a water system or whatnot, right? It goes back to either revenue that you have to collect from the community, or it is priced based on the credit rating from the community. So again, Hamtramck different from Ann Arbor, right? So, or Flint or whatnot. So one is going to pay more for debt than the other one. So in that sense, the current financing systems actually bias against poor communities because of that. Smart infrastructure finance, what it does is, because it creates that data pool, that information pool, that gets actually transacted and valued in business-to-business markets. So now, so you're sort of almost shifting the agency, I guess, or the business-to-community line to a business-to-business line. So even then, a poor community can still capture some of the cash flows that come out of the business-to-business transactions. But this is a whole shift of thinking, I guess, around how we think about infrastructure systems. But hey, if the big investors are starting to think about pricing muni bonds that way, we better, it's already happening. This is not a new thing. It's been happening, and we have to sort of get ahead of that 8-ball. And I think there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of educational opportunities as well, which is why we're launching a new Master in Smart Infrastructure Finance at the University of Michigan in the College of Engineering. So all the design engineers and everybody else can take it and learn about these new financing models. Thank you. That was my little plug for today.
Thanks, Peter. Do you have any more, a couple quick points on that topic?
So just to pile on a little bit here, data has value, and the data will be present in the communities, it'll be present in NDOT and so forth. And so I would look at ways to get the American private sector involved in building out our infrastructure with access to data. But as part of that, when we make foreign military sales, typically, sir, there's a provision in there for us to source some of the materials in the host country. And that's part of the deal. Well, we could have a deal where to get access to the data that MDOT has and so forth for a fee, right? They also have to provide infrastructure dollars to expand out into the poorer communities, because data has value. And that value will only go up over time. So I think that's part of the creative solutions. And that's a role that the private sector and government and the universities can play in.
Yeah,
One more.
If I can quickly, I think that's where the knowledge gap is, though, because we don't understand that value, and therefore it's difficult to identify those win-win-win opportunities that Peter described. They're there, but we've got to leverage the data in order to understand the value.
Elizabeth, just quickly to Dean's point. So the company that I work for has 1/3 of North America's traffic signals. We have data on 100,000 intersections. We can't get all of it because some of the technology is old, but we're in the process of getting that. What we've struggled with is, okay, well, now what value does that have, right? How do you monetize that? So that's one of the things that I'm really interested in the smart infrastructure finance piece, because that's the conversation people have now. How do you monetize what we have? We sit on a whole bunch, but who's it of value? Who wants it and who wants to pay for it to help build the rest of it?
I don't want to hog time here, but just to answer that particular question, there's sort of mainly 3 buckets that people look at in terms of data. And the first bucket is the one that we've always been looking at as an infrastructure, is how do the data inform or improve our operations and maintenance. That's the first sort of bucket of data. The second bucket of data is the equity value. So basically, how does the data inform the equity appreciation, I guess, if you will, of infrastructure within a community? And that includes a lot of intangible data. That is anything from carbon reduction to happiness of the community to, all these other factors and whatnot. And then the third piece, that's equity. And equity is not transacted. So equity is just appreciated in a market kind of valuation context. The third one is derivative data, and that's the one that you're talking about. That's where the data auctions come in and all these other contracts and whatnot. So everybody, I mean, not everybody, but the financiers starting to look at these three buckets associated with infrastructure. But there was another piece that both of you brought up with regards to data, and that is, the whole privacy issue, right? Privacy and cybersecurity issue. And so there's a lot of conversation in many communities, from cities to smaller communities, and that is, how do we start thinking about another word here, data ontologies? How do you bucket different kinds of data with respect to privacy considerations and cybersecurity considerations? So the British are starting to talk about a data commissioner, an elected data commissioner that becomes part of cities and larger communities.
This is fascinating, and it'd be great to just be able to talk about each one of these for an hour or two. We want to be opening this up to general Q&A with the group here. And I think we have a couple of people here with us today who we'd like to call out in particular. And one of those people is, turn around here, from Michigan State University. He was mentioned earlier, but he is director of the Quello Center at MSU, Dr. Johann Bauer. And you had a nice introduction earlier, so I'm not going to repeat it, but if you could share with us a little bit more about the work that you've been doing on the Moonshot and other work.
Yes, my pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me say maybe a sentence on the center that I'm currently directing. It's called the Quello Center for Media and Information Policy, which gives you the scope of the work we're doing. Jim Quello used to be a commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission. He was from Detroit. He served for almost a quarter century at that commission, was a very impassioned public interest advocate, and he always was working on those sort of bipartisan solutions that would really advance the public interest. So the center tries to do theoretically rigorous work that is practically actionable. And sometimes, it's difficult to reconcile those two, but that's our goal. And I'd like to sort of briefly mention, because this was alluded to, two pieces of work that we did. One was in the city of Detroit. Now that study has been read like a Rorschach test by many people, right? I mean, it's a nuanced piece of work, and you emphasize different aspects of it. Essentially, what we found are three things. This was actually done by my predecessors before I became the director of the institute. One was that indeed connectivity is not the primary issue probably in many Detroit neighborhoods, although I should say this study was limited only to three of those. Cody Rouge, I think this neighborhood, 7-8 Mile, Woodward, and then I think Milwaukee Junction were the three neighborhoods. But in those, its representative was done in collaboration with Wayne State University, a survey of people plus focus groups. However, households are underconnected. There's no way not to see this, right? But they're very creative, like the bra strapped model also is very, very widespread, where they find ingenious ways to find connectivity, whether it's through the neighbors, piggybacking on others, going to coffee houses and so forth. Not the best way to really take advantage of these technologies. The second thing we found is that the myth that broadband is used for entertainment purposes is completely wrong. Entertainment was the number 8 or number 9 type of uses, among others. It was job seeking, information seeking, health access to healthcare information, and so forth. And then lastly, we did find evidence that there was indeed an affordability issue. Right? And the cost of getting broadband in the city of Detroit is actually comparable to mid-income countries, globally speaking, and that's relatively high. Right? And so something has to be done on that regard. And then the second one, sorry, that I'd like to mention briefly, because I think it contributes to this discussion, is the one that Joe already alluded to. It's that related to the Moonshot Project, and that our broadband data is inaccurate has been known since the NTIA created the first map about 10 years ago. Right? And it's a statistical attribution rule that they used for simplicity that led to an overcounting of connectivity. And so there's many efforts around the United States currently to improve the data, the quality of the data. But there's one big flaw of this data. All we do by looking at speed measurements, for example, is we look at those who are connected. We have no clue what happens to those who are not connected, right? So we figured of course we would like to know how big the quality, or good the quality of connectivity is for those who are connected, and that's what the the crowdsourcing, technology-driven model that we built, a platform to measure internet speed and internet quality, primarily initially with K through 12 students on a pilot basis together with Merit Networks. But we also built a second parallel study that looks at a survey-based study in classrooms with the same schools. And we found very, very ingenious ways, we think, to be able to connect those two data sets without violating any privacy issues. They're completely identified data. We use like a data trustee model that eventually will allow us to link the survey data with the accessibility data. And for the first time, we'll actually be able to tell what the consequences are of poor quality connectivity or no connectivity at all. And when we talk about infrastructure, part of the cost is actually what kind of infrastructure do we envision, right? And we cannot answer that question realistically unless we know more specifically what the benefits or the harms of not having access to infrastructure is. And we think that our work will enable us to answer those questions in a more robust and more meaningful way so that we can find least cost solutions to really fix the problem going forward. So in a nutshell, maybe more than a nutshell, but that's what we do.
Wonderful, thank you. Also, I'd like to introduce Wayne State University's Vice President of Research, Dr. Stephen Lanier is here. Thanks for joining us. And
thank you, Elizabeth. And I just also echo President Wilson's welcome for everybody here. As I look around this room, it's so nice to see all these bright people gathered at the table, but also our representatives from Senator Peters, Senator Stabeno's office, state representatives, private companies, different types of partners, because if we're going to do anything in this space, it takes all of these people participating together. I'd like to comment on a couple of things. I've been here about 5 years now, and one of the things that struck me about the URC and really culminated with this tour and this conversation today, I can't think of anywhere else in the country where you see this type of conversation of engaged people from the university, community, tackling broad issues of substance to the entire state. I mean, you just don't see that. I was trying to think about that. And I think it's a big deal. And as I think about that, and we've had some conversations on the URC, I meet with, of course, Britt and my peers at Michigan State and University of Michigan on a regular basis. But some of the things that we're doing here, I think would have relevance on a national scale. Because not just, Michigan's not alone in addressing these challenges, but I think we stand out in the teams that the people we've assembled and the way we're approaching it. And so I would think that some of these things that we're talking about here in terms of infrastructure would have relevance across the country. For example, we seeded some funding around water infrastructure that involved Peter and Carol and Joan from Michigan State University, and really seeded that with the goal of providing a platform for addressing infrastructure on a national scale. But you can even build, it's not really national, it's global. So many of the things that we're learning here is a local, global interchange of information and how you can integrate that. So I think this body is really well positioned to do that. Not only do you have people from the universities and government organizations, but foundations like the Herb Family Foundation, which also plays an important role. And then the third item I wanted to make, the third point I wanted to make is that as I've looked at this, we have, and the panel touched a little bit about this, but maybe it's worth talking a little bit more. We're talking about these infrastructure elements in different buckets. We have over here roads, we have over here broadband, we have over here infrastructure, we have here water. But in reality, what we really need is a healthy community. And what we're missing, I think, is sort of, what about social infrastructure? Social may not be the right word, but this umbrella of a healthy community that integrate, what do we have to do to integrate all of these different buckets of infrastructure to generate a healthy community where people feel empowered and liberated to do everything that they can do? Nowhere is probably that more evident than here in the city of Detroit, where all of these different infrastructure buckets come together. And then that challenge, I think, is also further amplified by many years of accumulated allostatic load, stress on the system, the built environment that plays out in different ways. So I think as we go forward, it'd be interesting to kind of think about how Britt and all our colleagues here can further nurture this model so it has national impact. And then two, how we can think about anchoring or integrating these different buckets of infrastructure around community empowerment. So that's sort of the things that bubble up in my mind.
What a great way to wrap us up. Thank you. I believe that there is time for question and answer from the folks in the rolly chairs. We've got a couple of microphones set up, that one there, one on the other side of the room. So if you do want to ask a question, please make sure you state your name and the organization or agency that you're representing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chip Amo. I am the Director of Sustainability for Henry Ford Health System, just down the road here, so glad you all are here for this. I just kind of wanted to echo the last speaker and pose the question as well. In one of the takeaways, we talked about jobs, 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 and I know there's always a focus when looking at infrastructure on the immediate jobs of building the infrastructure, and oftentimes the public conversation is around building the infrastructure and the jobs that are created from that. But how do we do a better job of quantifying the jobs of what good infrastructure creates in terms of attracting businesses to the region, to the state? We're well known for our environment and protecting and wanting to protect that. So how does having good infrastructure with things like they were doing in Washington, D.C. with building, green infrastructure to support stormwater versus investing in that, how do we quantify that? And then how do we also, as we're doing the equation, because I struggle this right now with our own building our sustainability program at Henry Ford, how do we put value on the impact on people, on the, in our case, it's employee engagement, but how do we value the citizen engagement and the fact that they're happier, as you mentioned before, the social benefits of the infrastructure as well?
I'll jump in because I'm not shy. On the jobs front, I'll just point you to it. We're sitting surrounded by academics, so I mean, I leave it to you to do the rigorous study to tell what's going to happen in the region. But at the national scale, at least from the energy department, we did a quadrennial energy review that did produce what would happen if we invested fully in our energy infrastructure for transmission and distribution. It was something to like 1.5 million jobs would be the end result. But I leave that to the smarter folks in the room. But to your other point on sort of equity, inclusion, and engagement of employees, I'm so glad you brought that up because as I sit in this room, there is a well-known saying here, I think, in Detroit, Maurice Cox, who's a city planner, often will say, if it's not with us, it's not about us. And so as we think about engagement in Detroit, please keep that in mind. This is a very white room, and we're not in a very white city. So I'm pivoting now to talk about one of the things I did support when I was in service called the Smart Cities Challenge. The city of Detroit did apply for it. It was a Department of Transportation opportunity, predated the Amazon HQ2 opportunity. Similar bruises, however. Smart Cities Challenge, I thought, at least for this conversation, was important to bring up. It was a $50 million opportunity that one city would get. And of course, as much as it pains me, Columbus, Ohio got that money. But what the reason they received that big pile of cash was because the question was, if we give you a bag of money, how will you use it how we use mobility to affect change in society? And Columbus answered the question and said, we have an insane infant mortality problem. We're going to solve that through mobility dollars. we're like, that's a really good use of money, here you go. The most interesting part about that investment is it brought about $500 million off the sidelines from private sector investment. So to your point about figuring out this investment, the leverage there is huge, and the outcomes for, you know, kids and moms is pretty important too. So off the soapbox now.
To specifically try to get to your question, how do we measure it? I mean, we're trying to standardize some of these intangible, I guess, values, I guess, if you will. The ESG space, environmental, social, and governance space, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, is trying to standardize this now through I forgot what the foundation is in San Francisco now. Sustainable Accounting Development Board. So they're trying to standardize how you actually ask that question, how do you find out that information. The other one that many investors are starting, so corporations are using that. The way investors are starting to look at the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals that are more broadly defined by the UN, and that of course reaches across, I mean, rich and poor, and there's probably some information we can get out of that. So with very specific questions, very specific weights and quantifiers affiliated with that. So that might be something to take a look at, and I don't think that's ever been permeated inside a community to do that. That's a very good question, figuring out how to do that.
So I'm an engineer, so I deal in data and results. And so we have to be in this for the long haul. Short-term measures won't tell us where you're going. You have to look long-term. The competitive advantage for Michigan is the quality of life here. We all use it. When we recruit people to the universities, when we recruit people to companies, we use the quality of life as the reason someone wants to move their family here. And so long term, we have to keep playing on that. We got to keep showing that the infrastructure improvement in Michigan leads to a quality of life that makes a competitive advantage for Michigan, particularly over the West Coast and East Coast, because that's who the competitors are in a technology environment. And there's no reason that Michigan cannot lead in technology. We've got all the pieces and parts, but we have to show that the quality of life here is so much better. And I think it's a compelling case.
We have, if there is one more question, a brief one, we can take it.
It's not the question,
Okay.
Mike, it's the answer, Mike.
Questions are all brief.
My name is John Norton. I'm the Director of Energy Research and Innovation for the Great Lakes Water Authority. Peter was on my doctoral committee, so if I sound belaborious, there's the reason.
You just won Jeopardy, you did.
Yeah. And Jerry Lynch was also on my doctoral committee as well. There's something, when I've been at about a half a dozen of these. We're funding about $1.5 million worth of research a year. Very applied, very applied, very applied. And then a few actual fundamental pieces with Wayne State regarding PFAS. But here's something I want to talk about. When I wander about our facilities, so earlier today I was at the largest wastewater treatment plant in the world, and that's kind of cool, actually. I brag about that. I got married last week, and we toured the one on Mackinac Island, because that's what you do with your wife. But and a lot of the universities, when they have these meetings, there's infrastructure and there's innovation, and those are cool. I'm an engineer too, you know, but here's what a fundamental need is. And a fundamental need is something that the people that finance this stuff can deal with, and it's not more research. I have a PhD, I've written papers, I'm telling you that's not what we need. When I go around the water treatment plants and our wastewater treatment plant, we need the vocations, we need the trades. And so we're right now, I'm working with our department, we call it OD, Organizational Development, it's our HR group, to help figure out how we can train our employees better. That's where some of my research money is going to be going next year. And it just was a sudden smack in the face to realize, after going into the schools, the high schools, which I do quite a lot with my wife now, who's a professor at Illinois, these kids aren't getting shop or electronics. And, well, what do we need to keep Waterworks Park running and the Rouge River wastewater treatment plant running and all that? We need water treatment operators, but we need a hell of a lot of people with hands-on skills in electronics, plumbing. I'm a director. Our top master electricians and our top master plumbers earn more than I do. They're putting a lot of overtime keeping those water plants going when they have trip breaks and whatnot. They're earning good 6-figure coin. Let's go around Detroit and see how many people would find that interesting. Hey, I talk to people. Are you going to college? You in college? You thinking of going back? Well, how do I tell them? How do I give this to them? Hey, are you in the trades? So a guy served me lunch a couple of days ago, and I said, hey, you know, you thought of going to college? Oh, I got there. Degree in economics. He's serving me salad. I'm trying to get some relevance there. We need the trades. We need the hands-on skills. And that, when I go around and say, what research do you need? What do you got going there? There's things we're doing, trust me, to make sure Flint never happens again. And by the way, our water that we're delivering is awesome. But we need, the number one thing that they tell me is they need trained, skilled trades. There you go. It's not a question.
Okay.
So with that, we are going to wrap it up. Again, thank you everyone for making time today to be part of this. We have about 5 minutes left. Plus, I think we have the room for a little while after this if you want to stick around and meet with one another and chat. That's another lesson learned from the dialogues is people really like to stick around and chat. So please feel free to do so. Thank you again. And thanks to our panelists.